Hello, everyone, and welcome to Is This Anxiety? If you signed up for this, you are here because that's a question you probably have. And you probably saw in wherever you signed up that that is actually one of the most common questions I get from people, parents. I am a coach who helps parents of anxious kids relax and enjoy being a parent again. And so when people are wondering, when people start seeing behaviors that they just aren't sure what's going on with their kids, it's very common for parents to ask themselves, could this be anxiety? And when they ask themselves, sometimes they reach out to me. So I thought it would be great to come here today with those of you who are here live and those of you who might be getting this as a recording later and just talk about how do you know, what do I say when someone calls me and asks that question? So let's jump into that. I'm going to share my screen. So this is a little clunky, forgive me. And for those of you who are here live, when I share my screen, I can no longer see the chat box. So if you leave a chat, I will be toggling back and forth, but I may not see it right away. So let's just jump right into it. Is this anxiety? Like I said, the most common question I get, especially from parents of teenagers, and I'm really going to focus on teenagers today. I will mention a few things about younger kids here and there, but mainly my discussion is going to be about teens because that is often when we really start to have those questions. Is this anxiety? What is going on with my kid? So just to start off with, something that you, if you're here, you already know this, you lived through it, and you are living through it again with your own child, but the teen years are tough. And one of the reasons that they're so tough, and they're actually the toughest kind of in those early teen years, and it starts kind of getting a little better, is our teenagers it's their job to figure out who they are. Up until now, they've sort of accepted, we gave them a name and told them where they were going to go to school and told them what sports they were going to play. And they just sort of went along with a lot of it. And once they reach these teenage years, this is their job to figure out, what do I really like? Who am I? And some of that figuring out is all relative to who's around them and their friends and their peers. And so they really decide how good or bad, cool or uncool, smart or dumb, all of those things are relative to other people. It's not, they don't have that core sense of who they are yet. So it's really, these are hard developmental years with a whole lot of stuff going on. Probably one of the easiest ways to think about these teenage years, and I say this to parents and I remind myself, because I also am a parent of two teenagers, that the teenagers are a lot like toddlers. They're a lot like toddlers in the terms of all the developmental stuff that is happening and just how the world is opening up to them, and they have all of these new abilities and freedoms that they're trying to figure out, and they can be overwhelmed and they can be frustrated. And so if we think of them like big toddlers, I think sometimes that's a helpful way to look at our teens. And one of the ways that teens are like toddlers is the brain. The toddler years are a huge point of development for their brains. And the same goes for these teenage years. There is a ton of stuff happening in their brain. So it's really hard to talk about teenagers or to talk about anxiety without at least spending a couple minutes talking about the brain. So let's start with teenagers. What's happening in the teenage brain? Well, a lot. Like I said, it's a big period of brain development. Things are kind of coalescing and coming into form after all those early childhood years of just learning a whole bunch of stuff. Now we start winnowing away and focusing on the pathways that we really use and need. But probably the most important thing to really know about that teenage brain is that in all of our brains, humans, all of our human brains, we have a prefrontal cortex. It's up here at the front of our heads. That's why we call it the prefrontal cortex. And it is the place where we are able to do lots of our more complex thinking. So problem solving, generating lots of different alternatives and options, strategizing, assessing risk. That's a big one. We are able to say, as we're coming up with these options, we can say, well, this is one thing I could do, but it's very dangerous, or it's going to be very expensive, or whatever. So all of that stuff happens in the prefrontal cortex. But the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until somewhere usually in the early to mid 20s. Some kids maybe early 20s, some kids maybe later, all the way to 24, 25 years old. And if you tuned in for one of I just did another talk about launching teenagers. And in that talk, I mentioned that this is also when teenagers are going through all this big brain development, but our prefrontal cortex is not fully formed, but they want to try things and they want to get out in the world and do all this stuff. This is the time of life where teenagers are most likely to suffer an accident. They're most likely to die from something that was completely avoidable. Car accidents, boating accidents, those sorts of things, because teenagers are not able to assess risk as well as adults. I'm not saying they can't do it at all, because they can, but they aren't as good at it as we are, and they won't be as good at it until that part of their brain is fully developed. So that is a big thing to think about when we think about our teenagers. The other thing, when we think about anxiety in anyone, adults, teenagers, little kids, anxiety is also a result of stuff that is going on in our brain. It's the way our brain works. But it's a different part of our brain. So the prefrontal cortex is like this really sophisticated, elaborate thing. It's this cool thing that we humans have. The amygdala and the limbic brain, or I like to call it the lizard brain, it is not sophisticated. It is very simple. We call it the lizard brain because it's similar to something that like a reptile would have. It is a very simple part of our brain. And the main focus for that part is to keep you alive in a period of stress, a period of danger. When you reach a period of danger, or I would be in a period of danger, or anyone, all evaluating options and coming up with strategies. If it's like the flood waters are rushing in and you've got to escape, or the house is on fire, or you're being chased by a lion, those are not times to come up with all sorts of different alternatives and strategies and assess risk. It's time to act, and act immediately. And that's all this part, your amygdala, is designed to do. It's designed to send signals, and it's very efficient because it keeps us alive. So it's important that it's efficient and effective. When this amygdala is triggered, it's going to send signals to your whole body to say you're in danger, and you need to decide between three quick options. You either need to fight whatever this is causing the danger. If you're being chased by that lion, you need to either fight that lion, you need to run away from that lion, or you need to hide. You need to freeze in place and hope that the lion doesn't see you. It's very simple, and it really hijacks a lot of this part of the brain, that complex thinking part, because that's not helpful. When you're in true danger, the only thing your body and mind need to be focused on is fighting, getting away, or freezing in place. And so it's very simple. It's very efficient, sends signals to your digestive system, to your respiration, to your blood flow. All of these things change when you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. So that's what's happening when someone experiences anxiety. All of this complex reasoning is not being fully accessed, and instead your body and your brain is acting as if it is in extreme danger, and it has three options, and it's trying to work through those three options and decide what to do. So that's what's happening in an anxious brain, and that's what's happening in a teenage brain. But you're here to talk about, anxiety, and so I do want to go ahead and give you some quick statistics. But before I even jump into the statistics, what I hope what you got from all of that discussion of the brain, which it's hard, like I said, it's hard to talk about teenagers, it's hard to talk about anxiety without talking about the brain, because both are so tied to what is happening in the brain. But what I really, really always want everyone to get, in fact, I'm going to turn off my slides for 2 seconds and come back, because I really want you to know, and I'm also checking the chat. Anxiety is a normal part of being human. So before we go into statistics, before I say anything else, we all experience anxiety. It is a normal part of being human. I speak to teenage groups, high school students a lot, and that is like one of my key messages. I always say, and I will repeat it over and over in this talk, because it's just so important that before you go into any of this stuff, let's just remember that everyone experiences anxiety. Every single person. What we're talking about now is that some people have a hair trigger on that mechanism that I just talked about before. So the mechanism to send your body into fight, flight, or freeze, we all are going to go there at a different way, a different time, a different levels. So some of us have a hair trigger. It doesn't take much, and we immediately can jump in. We have a very sensitive fight, flight, or freeze response. Some of us on the other end of the spectrum, it takes a lot to get us there. But even those people that it takes a lot, they will experience anxiety as well. They will experience fight, flight, or freeze. It doesn't happen as often or as easily as people that are on the other end of the continuum. That's all. But anxiety is a normal part of being human. Now, when we're talking about our teenagers, and you're here because you are concerned that maybe you have a teenager who is struggling with anxiety, it is very, very, very common among teens. If you are here and you are thinking that you have a teenager who is struggling with anxiety, welcome to the club. It is a big club. 1 in 3 adolescents will experience an anxiety disorder. And keep in mind, so that's 1/3 of our kids, and that uses the term disorder. What I've been saying is anxiety is universal, but medical professionals have specific, and mental health care professionals have specific criteria they use to determine whether they would term it a disorder or just the anxiety that we all experience. And 1 in 3 have anxiety severe enough that a medical professional or a mental health professional would categorize it as a true disorder. And this number has been rising over the past decade. And there's lots of reasons. That's a whole nother talk that I could do on why do we think our kids are more anxious than they used to be. I wish I could say it's, better reporting. That probably is a tiny bit of it, but truly something really is going on, and our kids really are more anxious than they used to be. Anxiety and depression tend to go hand in hand. That's why I have the rate of the hospitalization rate for suicidal teenagers, which has doubled in the past 10 years. Anxiety and depression, people often, when they're talking to me, say, oh, and by the way, or you should know this, that my child also suffers with depression. And truly the only time I would ever be surprised is if someone said to me, my child has anxiety and never has depression, because that is what's unusual. To say that your child suffers from both anxiety and depression is kind of expected. They are best friends. They go hand in hand. They go together. If you truly struggle with anxiety, typically you are also going to struggle with some element of depression as well. A lot of us are hoping, if you have high school students, and there's a lot of anxiety in high school, there truly is, and a lot of people hope that, oh, once they leave high school, it's going to get better. Unfortunately for all of us, that's not necessarily the case. It's, sorry, just trying to keep an eye on the time so I don't go too long. But college students also are struggling. Our college students, the first year of college in particular, is really hard on these kids. Their anxiety tends to ramp up over the first semester, and then reaches a high point and stays at that high point through the second semester of freshman year. 63% of all college students, not just freshmen, have reported having overwhelming anxiety, and 23% have sought treatment for anxiety. One of the goals I have in doing talks like this and talking to students and talking to high schoolers and just talking as much as I can in church basements and wherever people will listen to me about anxiety is, one, so that everyone knows anxiety is normal and it is common and everyone experiences it at some point. And I also would love to see that number, that 23% who sought treatment, to go up. If 63% are struggling, and only 23% are seeking help, I'd love for just these talks, and every time I'm with parents, if we can encourage our kids, they don't have to struggle. They can get help, and help doesn't necessarily just mean medication. There's lots and lots and lots of help out there so that you aren't struggling. Okay. So if you're trying to figure out if your teen is struggling with anxiety, here is a textbook kind of list of things, laundry list that someone with anxiety might struggle with: irritability, fear, worry, difficulty concentrating, and that general keyed up, anxious, hyped up feeling. Now we're talking about teenagers, so I'm going to tell you my experience with teenagers. We just said it's fight, flight, or freeze. And when teenagers are anxious, that is what you typically see. You will see fighting, anger, big feelings. You will see flight, escaping, sometimes literal, the going to the room, the slamming of the door, the not leaving the room. That can be flight. The other common anxiety-induced flight that I see in teenagers, I see in my own and I see in others, is the anxious scrolling of the phone, anxious scrolling through social media or whatever. And they scroll through their social media all the time. But if you pay attention, there is a difference between the child who is scrolling in a calm sort of, I'm bored, I'm just entertaining myself way, and an anxious, frantic, I am just trying to distract my brain and my body from these feelings I'm having right now. So that's flight. That is anxiety. If you're seeing that sort of thing, you may be seeing anxiety in your child. And freeze, it's the, I can't get out of the car, I can't go there, I can't decide, should I do this or should I not? And sometimes it's simple decisions that they've always been able to make. I just got invited to a friend's house. Should I go? And part of you is a little confused. Why do I need to be even consulted on this? This is kind of an easy question, but often when they're experiencing some anxiety about things, they have a hard time. Again, we explain it with the brain. They're not accessing their prefrontal cortex. Their processing is more back in their lizard brain. And so when they're anxious, they don't know, should I go? Should I stay? And they're freezing. The other thing I'll just say about these symptoms, as if you are here listening to this and watching me and trying to decide, is my child experiencing anxiety. Um, what I said earlier about we're all on a continuum and some of us are more easily triggered into an anxious state than others. Um, there are usually signs that your child may be more easily triggered. And that does not mean there's something wrong with your child. It is like everything, like every continuum about our kids out there. Some kids are more easily, can do athletic endeavors more easily than others. Some kids can grasp the math quickly and some don't. We're all on a continuum on everything. This is just one continuum where some kids, and there are pros and cons almost with every single continuum, but these kids are more easily triggered, and there probably have been signs all along that new situations, they maybe were fearful, they took a longer time to warm up to people, places, they don't necessarily make changes easy. So in our little kids, those are some of the signs that maybe their amygdala gets triggered a little more easily than some of the more laid back, easygoing, go with the flow kids. Does not mean there's something wrong with them, just means that's how they're built. And we'll come back to this as I go along, but just knowing this is how you are, this is how you work, such a huge gift to our kids. That's the language I use in my house all the time, and it's language I encourage you to start using with your kids, no matter how old they are. If they're teenagers, it's still great to hear and to understand and to start accepting, this is just how I work. Things like this tend to freak me out. And like I said, I'll give some more examples and thoughts about that later, but that's what psychological looks like. Here's the physical stuff that you might see if your child is struggling with anxiety: sweating, dry mouth, hot flashes or chills, dizziness, heart palpitations. They say, I can't breathe. They get really tense. They may shake. They may get a lot of anxious kids. It's stomach issues. It presents as stomach issues, especially our little ones. Sometimes that's the clue too. I said there have been signs along the way when they were small, if they were the ones who got stomach aches and wanted to come home, wanted to check out of school, a lot of times that's just anxiety. Restlessness, inability to sleep. Sleep is a tricky thing, because if you don't get enough sleep, you can trigger anxiety. And if you're anxious, it's hard to get enough sleep. So it's a vicious circular thing with sleep. But sleep is super, super important for our mental health and our physical health, both. Another question sometimes parents ask me is, I don't know, she's just really stressed. I don't know if this is anxiety, it just might be stress. Well, the way I try to get my clients, parents, to think about this stuff is think about it for yourself. You know the difference. When we are going on vacation, we typically are very stressed right before vacation, right? I got to get all the stuff done, line up these things and make sure the travel plans and make sure everybody's got their laundry done and whatever. Going on vacation is stressful, but it typically doesn't make you feel anxious. You don't feel fear or dread or panic about going on vacation typically. And that's sort of where that line is drawn, but it is a very fuzzy line. It is hard, and they typically go together. If someone is under a lot of stress, that's often what pushes them into the state of anxiety. So we said earlier, everyone experiences anxiety. Anxiety is normal. It is a part of being human. Our brain is designed to push us into a state of anxiety when it feels like there may be danger. When does that become a disorder? So these are the types of things that a mental health professional would look at if they were going to say this is actually a disorder. It's not just the normal anxiety. It's very, very severe. It lasts for a long time. Like I said, we're all going to experience it, but we usually come in and out of it. It happens all the time. And here's probably the most important thing if you're trying to decide how serious is this. When anxiety starts to impact your day-to-day life, when you're not able to do the things you want to do or should be able to do or other people are doing, you're not able to go to that friend's house, you're not able to make it to school, some basic things like that, that's when you start to be pushing into the area of this is not what we just call the normal anxiety. This might be a disorder. And again, even if it is a disorder, that is not something that necessarily, there are a whole host of ways that anxiety disorders are treated. So I'm not saying that means medication or it means anything. It just means it's something that probably does need some sort of attention and treatment, just like I said about those 63% of college students who are experiencing overwhelming anxiety. They probably could use some sort of treatment. So, one question I haven't answered, and you may be asking yourself, is why do I even talk about this stuff? Who am I? You probably saw, if as you registered, something like Dr. Tanya Crombie, and maybe you saw on that first slide, I do have a PhD in psychology. I am not a practicing psychologist. I practice as a life coach, as I said at the very beginning. I coach parents of anxious kids. That is not what I've always done. I've actually done several different things over my career. But I've really focused almost exclusively my coaching over the past 5 years or so on parents and parents of anxious kids. One, because I have this background and I'm a coach and all of that, but mostly because I am a parent, and I am a parent of an anxious child, a child who struggles with anxiety. And as I've said all along, that's normal. That does not mean there's something wrong with my child. It just means that her brain tends to be a little more easily triggered. Her amygdala is more easily triggered, and there are some actual benefits that come along with that. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But that's who I am. This is, as you can see, hopefully it comes across, but this actually is one of my favorite things to do and favorite things to talk about. I am kind of on a mission to spread the word that anxiety is normal, that it's okay, that our kids can feel this way and it's okay. And if you ever want me to talk to your school or your Girl Scout troop or whatever, I will do it in a heartbeat, because I am truly on a mission to spread that message to kids. It is a helpful message to kids. That's who I am. And by now, we've gone over all this stuff. So you may, or I hope, are starting to have a feeling of this may be anxiety, or maybe you've got a feeling of relief and saying, maybe it's not anxiety, maybe I'm overreacting. And that would be wonderful. But my guess is, if you're here, you think that maybe this is something I should be aware of. And if that's the case, I want to leave you with at least a few tips of things to do right now that will be helpful. So first, like I've said 100 times, and we'll say 100 times more, let them know that this is normal. It's really helpful to even explain to them what I've explained here about their brain. You have a part of your brain that is designed to keep you alive. It is super helpful. If the house catches on fire, that part of your brain is going to tell you, run, get out of the house. It's not going to say, what should I do? I'm not sure. It kicks in and you know what to do. So it's a gift that we have that keeps us alive in times of real danger. And we all experience anxiety. Some people experience it more often than others, because just like everything, we're on a continuum, and some people are more and some people are less. But it's normal. So tell them that, remind them of that over and over and over again, because it's super important. Not every experience of anxiety is a disorder or something that you need to freak out about. It's just a normal part of being human. It's just one of our many, many, many emotional reactions to the world. Now, the next thing, this one's a little trickier, but believe it or not, I believe it in my whole heart, and you can convince your child of this as well. Anxiety is actually your friend. I took this little picture of this weird chameleon, because one way, especially if your kids are younger, I like to help younger kids start thinking of their anxiety as like a monster or a lizard or some give it, make it tangible and give them a tangible symbol, like buy a little stuffed lizard or a ceramic lizard or something. Let them pick it out. It's cute, it's fun, and just remind them, this is your lizard. We all have a lizard and it's in our head and it talks to us, and this is your lizard telling you that you're not safe. So that's where we start when they're smaller. When they get to be older, when they're teenagers, remind them that their anxiety is often, it's something that they should notice and sort of be curious about. So my lizard is telling me I'm not safe right now. What's going on? Sometimes with our teenagers especially, their lizard brain is actually responding to something that is actually dangerous. They're in situations that they aren't sure if they are safe. And with teenagers, that truly does happen. They're in a situation where people are trying things that they're not ready to do. People are encouraging them to try things that they don't want to do. They're, teenagers are super, super social. So it's not unusual for our teenagers to be with their close group of friends and maybe get separated and be in a group where they don't know these people so well, or someone brings in a group that they don't know well, and they get a feeling of, I don't know these people, I'm not sure if they're safe. That is a gift. And what we really need to teach our teenagers, boys and girls, that when you have a feeling that maybe you aren't safe, when your lizard is saying, I don't feel good about this situation, I don't want to walk down the dark alley that isn't where there are no lights, and that's not the best way to get to the car or the best way to get home. Let's take an Uber. I don't want to get behind the wheel after I've had a drink, or I definitely don't want to get in a car with someone who's had a drink and my friends are all saying it's okay and I'm feeling anxious. That anxiety is a message from your brain that you're not safe and you should listen to it. So in many times, sometimes our anxiety is freaking out about a math test. And in that case, we have to acknowledge that we are still safe. The math test will not kill us. But there are other times our anxiety really is a signal that we need to pay attention to. And only if they learn to befriend their anxiety and start attending to it and noticing, oh, in this case, I'm just feeling anxious because, I forgot to bring my homework and I know the teacher's going to yell at me and I'm probably going to be embarrassed in class. That's not going to kill me. I'll be okay. Versus some of these other situations where they're feeling anxious, and actually there is a reason for that anxiety. The other tricky thing about anxiety and teenagers, and especially teenagers in substance abuse, is sometimes they will try and medicate that feeling away in a situation, the big party, and there's some sketchy people that they don't know and they're feeling anxious, so they think they'll have a drink to make themselves feel better. And lots of bad situations have resulted from that, right? That scenario. So you also have to remind your kids and help teach them about their anxiety and trusting it and not medicating it away when actually it's maybe very helpful and something that they need to know. And the last tip for you, if you are dealing with a teenager who is experiencing and struggling with some anxiety, you've seen the types of things I described when I said fight, you've seen them fight, you've experienced the flight, you've seen them freeze. You need to teach them some simple brain hacks. And one of the simplest, and when I work with parents, as I've said, and when I'm working with parents, this is a part of what we do. I go over a lot of these different brain hacks, but I'm going to give you one right now that you can take and use immediately. And that is, again, explain to your children, your teenagers, even your little ones, use language that makes sense to them, but explain to them what's going on in their brain. And then explain to them This, when you've explained fight, flight, or freeze, and how that is a message from your brain that's super efficient and happens almost immediately, goes all the way down into your body and says, you need to breathe differently, you need to pump blood differently. Your whole body reacts. There is also a feedback mechanism that goes the other way. So this is the brain hack. When your amygdala is triggered and is flooding out these signals to the entire body that you've got to be ready to fight, flight, or freeze in place right now, be very, very afraid. If you are able to take long, slow, deep breaths, like all the way, try and breathe all the way down to your toes, feel your lungs expand, feel your stomach expand. Big, long, deep breaths in and slow, deep breaths out. That is actually a brain hack. It's not one of those trite, like just breathe, just breathe. People say that because if you do it right, it works. Now, just breathing, and I have an anxious teen, as I've said, and I've said, okay, babe, just breathe. And she'll say, I ain't breathing, it's not working. It won't work. That's not working. That's not how it's going to work ever. What does work is the long, slow, deep breaths. Those shallow breaths are just reinforcing you're in trouble, you need to panic. But the long, slow, deep breaths send a message back up to your amygdala, to your lizard brain. And it says, don't panic. We have lots of oxygen. You're okay. Because it's a feedback mechanism, because like I said, so much of our bodies are designed to keep us alive. So much of these processes are just about simple survival. And one of the fastest ways that we don't survive is if we don't have enough oxygen. So when we do get these lots of slow intake and extake and exhales, and we know that the oxygen is coming in, our brain is able to calm down and say, oh, I've got oxygen, I'm okay. There is a caveat to this very simple brain hack, and that is that you cannot do it when they're anxious. Just about any brain hack, and like I said, I do teach a lot of them. If you try the first time you say, let's do some long, slow, deep breaths when your child is in the throes of a true panic attack or is truly anxious, and we've said all along, remember, this part of the brain that's listening and thinking and processing this beautiful story about your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and the feedback, that does not work. They cannot take that information in. Their brain is shut down in that area. Their brain is all this very simple lizard brain that's saying, I can't hear, that's just this, fight, flight, or freeze. She's in my way, I'm going to yell at her, I'm going to run away from her, I'm going to slam my door. So these tips don't work when they're anxious. The only way these tips work is if you are actively practicing them when you're not anxious, so that when you are anxious, it doesn't require thought, it doesn't require practice. It's just something you've been doing forever. And I'll give you the best example I can give you from my own life. I meditate regularly. It is one of the key ways that I manage my own anxiety and help myself be the best parent I can be, is by meditating regularly. If I were to try to meditate for the first time, or even in, I've been doing it for years and years and years. I am not a natural at it. It is not, I'm not one of those people who just easily can zone out and, become very zen. That's not who I am. I'm very high strung. And so it has taken years and years and years of practice to become what I would call a meditator, and still acknowledging I am not, a super meditator by any stretch. But because I do it all the time, when I feel anxious, when I feel stressed, I am still able to do it. If I did not do it all the time, on the days that I feel great, on the days that I feel good, when I don't feel like I need it, I would never be able to do it when I do need it. So that is just an example, but that's true about any anxiety management technique that you might want to try. You cannot try to introduce them when your child is anxious. They really need to be things you've been introducing and doing for a long time, so that when you're anxious, it doesn't require that prefrontal cortex to be working, because it's not. So we've gone through a lot of information about how to decide what is anxiety, how it's normal, what is it, a disorder or not. Do I think, is my kid experiencing this stuff? If they are, here's some things that I can do to help them. But what I want to leave you with, and I think this is probably one of the most important parts, I hope you stuck around till the end, because what tends to happen when we read a book, when we listen to a talk, any of this kind of stuff, is we lose sight of this critical piece that is, there is a big difference between knowing and doing it. It's still a problem, even though we have all this information, because a lot of that information is the what. I know what it is. I know what to do, but the how is also super important. So I'd like to use this example. It's in my book. I wrote a book called Stop Worrying About Your Anxious Child. And if you would like a free copy, a free download copy of that, all you have to do when you get, I'm going to send this out to everyone, including those of you who are here watching it live. You'll get this recording in that email. If you just respond to that email and say, hey, could I get a free downloadable copy? I'll send you a link and you can have that. But in my book, I talk about this issue and why we struggle to, just because we know things, it doesn't make it happen. And the example I use, which is absolutely true, is I will buy workout things. Like, years ago I would buy workout videos, and then I bought some workout DVDs, and now, not too long ago, I bought a workout download, or access to a website. And every single time I buy them, I truly think, this is the one, this looks so fun, I'm going to do this. And I don't do them. I never do them. And I don't know why. I don't buy them often because it takes me a while to forget that I don't do them. But, years will go by and something will really strike me and I'll be like, oh, this looks so fun, I'm definitely going to do it. And I don't. So the key message of that story is, you will not get buns of steel if you don't do. You will not become a yogi Zen master, which I am not, but I can say that I'm a meditator because I meditate, not because I've read books about meditation, which I did for years. But it wasn't until I sucked it up and sat there and kept doing it, even though I wasn't good at it, over and over and over again. That's the key. So just because you know what isn't always the key. There's also the how to do this stuff. And that is why I coach parents, because the how is probably 1,000 times harder than the what. The other reason that I coach parents, and the other reason that a lot of parents struggle with this, and when we're in the teen years in particular. So when we, like I said, these teenagers are like toddlers. And when we had toddlers, we typically have them in a preschool class, or we were in Mommy and Me together, or we were in a mom's group, but a lot, or we just had the other people that we knew, the other moms who were doing it all at the same time. And it was very common for us to get together for coffee after we dropped them off at preschool, or to stand around in the parking lot after we dropped them off at preschool, or whatever. So we had a lot of contact and interaction, or at the birthday parties, or at those kinds of things. We were all standing around together with our kids, and we all talked about, my kid just did this thing, and had other parents that said, oh yeah, my kid does that thing too. And we suddenly felt like, oh, okay. But something happens as our kids get big. We aren't dropping them places anymore. They're driving, and they don't want us there long before they drive. It already, they're asserting their independence, and they should, and that's normal. It's not normal for us to be at everything that they do. They go do things with their friends. That's how they're building their own sense of independence that they're going to need. But we have lost track and lost touch with our group, the group that we go to and say, hey, my kid's doing this thing, and have other people. The other thing that's when you don't have the close contact with the kids, you're not observing the kids as much anymore, or the parents, is the only way that we assess what everyone else's life is like are in little tiny snippets. We see little bitty pieces. A lot of times the pieces we're seeing are things like social media. So people are looking on Facebook and saying, well, oh, Barb's child has the honor roll again. My child is struggling to get to school. Obviously, I'm the only one who's experiencing this. And quite honestly, often that honor roll student is struggling to get to school too. We just don't know it. So a reason that sometimes dealing with all of the stuff that we're dealing with our teenagers is harder is because we don't have our sounding boards and our benchmarks that we used to have when they were small. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I do what I do and do this work is to create that sense of community among parents so we all can get a sense of this is normal, this happens to other people, this happens to good parents. That's another one, is we start to feel like, oh, the good parents don't experience this, I'm obviously doing something wrong. And that's not true. And the other final reason why managing our kids' anxiety is so hard for us when we have teenagers is so many of us are doing so much, everything we know to do to be good parents, to be good moms or good dads. And we lose sight of the fact that a crucial element of being a good mom or a good dad is being able to take care of yourself, be as good as you can be. And you cannot be as good as you can be. It's like I said earlier, I meditate. That is time I have to take out of my day every single day. Either I'm losing sleep, I'm having to get up a little earlier, or I'm having to give something up to do that. And it is a sacrifice I'm willing to make because it allows me to be the type of parent I want to be in the moment. And there are a lot of moments. So we lose sight of that. Somehow we think that if we just sacrifice everything for our kids and do everything for our kids and don't do for ourselves and don't take care of ourselves and don't invest in ourselves, that that's okay. That's what we're supposed to do. That means we're good parents. But it's hard to be a great parent if you aren't just centered and grounded and calm and all that stuff. You too, having an anxious child will trigger your own anxiety. It will send your lizard brain, your amygdala into fight, flight, or freeze. It is why sometimes when our children are having panic attacks, we are so anxious that we can't respond properly. We will fight, we will yell at them, we will step away, I can't deal with this, or we will freeze in place because we are so panicked. We don't know what to do with that child in front of us. And so a key obstacle that parents with anxious children tend to have is doing the things they need to do to get themselves into the right zone, place, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of it, so that they can rise above a panicking child, which is not easy. So bottom line, if you're here, if you have listened to this entire presentation, and I can't even see, I have to click back over to my other screen to see who's still here and if we have questions. But if you're here and you think your child is struggling, the odds are you're right. You know this child, you know what's going on. So the odds are pretty good that you're right. Now, does that mean it's more than a normal human experience of anxiety? That is something we'd have to dig in farther to say. But anxiety is normal. Everyone experiences it. If you think your child is experiencing it, you're probably right. And if you want to talk to me about your specific situation, if you want more guidance and thought about, do I think this is anxiety? Or if you want to, or you're thinking, actually, you're totally right, Tanya, which for the record, I am totally right. I do need to do something to help me become the calm, centered parent. I do need more information on how to do this, not just what to do, because I've got all the information about what to do. I need to know how to react to this thing right here in this moment. Just these generic tips aren't what I need. If you want to talk to me about any of that stuff, the easiest way probably is to just send me an email. I have my email address on the screen, which is tanya@guidanceforthefuture.com. However, as I said, every single one of you who registered for this today, whether you are here live or you are going to watch it later, I'm going to send you an email. And that email, all you have to do is hit reply and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. And that's what we will do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to stop the recording and